Howdy all, and welcome back to another episode of the Sanctified Podcast. Today, I want to talk about one of Wales' most highly regarded saints, Saint Teilo. Saint Teilo was born around the turn of the 6th century. He was born in Penally in Pembrokeshire in Wales. He studied at the monastic school at Whitland as a young man, where he became close friends with Dewi, who would go on to become Saint David, patron saint of Wales. Around 518, Teilo, Dewi, and Padam, who would also become a saint, set out on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, John III, who was the Patriarch of Jerusalem at the time, consecrated all three as bishops. The men would go on to found churches and abbeys in the coming years. Teilo started the Church of Llandeilo in Far in Dyfed, and may have started the center of Llandeilo in Carmarthenshire. If he didn't start it, he made it much more popular. Fate had other plans for Teilo after his work at Llandeilo started, and he couldn't stay at Llandeilo for long. And real quick, sorry if I kind of butcher any of these words. Welsh is a pretty tricky language, but I'm doing my best. So in 549, a yellow fever pandemic was sweeping Wales, and this pushed Teilo and his community to escape to safety in Cornwall and then to Dole in Brittany. They remained there for 7 years, and during that time, there's some interesting stories or events that I'm going to cover here. The first is that Budic II of Brittany asked Teilo for help. Only thing is, this wasn't just a case of help finding faith or help for the community. Oh no, this was much better. Budic needed Teilo's help defeating a dragon. Now, Teilo prayed and held faith that his Redeemer and Savior will be with him in the fight and would help him win. Almost immediately, Teilo had the beast under control, and through the Lord's commandment, had it follow him to the sea. There, he took the dragon out on the water, secured it to a rock so it wouldn't attack his people anymore, and would keep potential attackers away from his or King Budic's territory. Of course, I recognize this one is certainly harder to believe, but he isn't the only saint to have been credited with fighting a dragon. There are a few others that one day I'll discuss, but just bear in mind that there's a few accounts of such events happening. Also, bear in mind that this was the 6th century. A dragon then might be something totally different than what we picture today. Perhaps there was like some terrible creature that he vanquished, and the only way they could describe it was calling it a dragon. I don't know what it could have been, but I think it's possible that that's what happened. Like, for example, everybody thought the duck-billed platypus was a myth or a legendary animal until it was proven to be real. Or the rhinoceros, at first, when people heard about it in Europe, were like, there's no way that thing exists. But it does. It's real. So perhaps there was some creature, and the way they described it then is a dragon, and today maybe even it's extinct. I don't know. But it's just food for thought that might lend some credibility to this impressive accomplishment. Another story is that a lord in Brittany offered land to Teilo, and it was to be as much land as he could encircle from sunset to sunup. Teilo rode on a stag, which is a male deer, to cover the most distance possible. I don't know about you, but I think I would have ridden on a horse over a deer, but Teilo wasn't an ordinary person. You could argue his faith allowed him to befriend a wild animal for this. I didn't find any record that was the case, or anywhere that said like it's widely believed that that's the case, but I'm just suggesting it because that was my first thought. But I don't know, maybe he just had a friend with a deer. People do become close with wild animals today, so maybe he was just good with being one with nature. Okay, so this next story happened back in Wales. I'm not totally sure if it happened before or after the trip to Brittany, but I'm just going to throw it in here because I feel like it fits here after the story about the stag. And this is the story that there's a team of horses that would need no driver, and they would pull logs from the forest that were cut down. Now, if you're not familiar with horses and stuff, you should know that generally a team of horses, whether working in a field or working with logs or wherever, way back in the day, there would be somebody driving them, guiding them, making sure they kept at their job. Like the Amish today drive their horses. It's not like they hook the horse up and the horse goes to work in the field. They do need some guidance. But the really interesting about this is that one of the horses was found dead by the River Cohen, but was healed and revived by Teilo. This team of horses then worked for years at the job. Like, this horse wasn't just brought back, worked for a little while, and then died again. Like, he stayed alive for a long time afterwards. All right, so this last quick commentary is not as exciting as the last few, but I want to include it nonetheless. And it's that given Tailo's history in Brittany, there are several churches that are there now that are dedicated to him. Some of them depict Tailo riding a stag, which is obviously in reference to the legend of him riding a stag to get land. There are also limited records that Tailo received the confession of King Geraint while he was in Brittany. In addition to the churches, there are groves of fruit trees in Brittany that are called the groves of Tailo and Samson because these men planted 3 miles of fruit trees while they were there. And these still exist today. So I just thought that was kind of a fun little thing. Like, you could go visit the groves of Tailo if you were in the area, at least. So in the mid-6th century, around 555, Tailo and his community returned to Llandeilo far from Brittany. Around this time, he became one of the most revered holy men in Wales after Dewi, Saint David, died. He went to live on at Llandeilo far until he passed away in 560 on February 9th. And Tailo is a saint whose most famous miracle occurred at/after his death, depending on how you want to look at it. After passing away, there were some arguments over where Tailo would be buried. Penally said that he should be buried in their church since he was born there. Llandaff said he should bury at their church because he was their bishop. Finally, Llandeilo wanted him buried there because that was where he laid the foundations for his church and ultimately died. Now, reaching a solution seems pretty impossible since each kind of had a valid argument and insisted very intently that they deserved to be the site of his grave. However, overnight, Tailo's body is said to have multiplied into 3 so that each place could bury him. That's pretty crazy. I hadn't heard about a saint's body being multiplied before. Now, maybe it has happened, but this is the first one that I came across where that happened. So I think it's a pretty cool miracle to have attributed to this saint. It is also said that his body released a pleasant odor, which we've heard before, and it did not decay, which we've also heard about. But multiplying? Yeah, that I have not heard about. It hasn't happened to any of the other saints that I've covered so far. Maybe we'll get into another one where it does happen. We'll just kind of have to see how time goes on. So since his body was now 3 bodies, each church got to bury him and each church was happy. After that, St. Tailo's well at Llandaff became a site of pilgrimage, and many came to drink its water. It's said that those who drank its water were cured of paralysis and other ailments. Throughout the 19th century, it was used for outdoor baptisms as well. Now, sadly, the water was redirected to a nearby reservoir, and this kind of irked me a little bit just because it seemed like a very important historical holy place. Like, it'd be awesome if it still existed and people could go visit it today, but at some point, a group of people just kind of made up their minds that it didn't need to exist anymore, so they redirected the water and essentially got rid of the well and any healing powers that it may have possessed. All right, for this next part, you just got to bear with me for a little bit. I have something to talk about with Tailo still, and it might ruffle some feathers, but if we can just get through it, I'll give you a more reasonable explanation for what I think is most likely. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about this one particular subject related to Tailo, and it's called the cult of the head. Now, if you were to look up Tailo's name on Google or another search engine, you will eventually stumble across something mentioning the cult of the head, or the head cult. The idea was first proposed in the late 19th century that there was a cult that believed drinking water from a human skull could heal someone, especially if that water came from a holy well, such as Teilo's. Now, don't jump to conclusions just yet. Let me explain a little more, and I'll present a more modern understanding of the facts. Teilo's skull was stolen from his final resting place in the 1400s, which was centuries after he died. His skull was privately held in the Matthew family and in the Melchior family until its location was lost in the mid-20th century. It eventually turned up in the 1990s in Australia with the Melchior family, where it was then returned to the Llandaff Cathedral after a little while, and it remains there today. I'm sure many of you are conflicted on a saint being used like this, but beyond his skull, or at least what we assume is his skull, because again, his body multiplied into 3, so I'm not really sure how that works out. Kind of a little gray area. If there's 3 of his skulls, are they all his skull, or do you need all 3 to be considered his skull? I don't know, but that's not what we're going to go into right now. But there's little evidence that the cult actually existed as once believed. So remember how I said that the rumor started in the 19th century about Teilo's skull being used? Well, that's just when someone else made that conclusion based off of records of a Roman historian around the 1st century. And I mean like the 1st century. Livy, the historian, was alive from 59 BC to 17 AD. So an assumption 1,300 years after the saint's passing, based off of records from 5 centuries before the saint was even born. Like, yeah, I personally don't think there is a direct correlation, and that there were just a few people who had some, let's say, less than virtuous beliefs about healing, and they got possession of what they at least believed to be Saint Teilo's skull. Now, modern historians and archaeologists question if the cult even existed, because it was all assumptions from findings. Like, there wasn't anything that directly said the cult existed and that Teilo was involved at all. But again, I want to be sure I went over this because it's an unfortunate mark on an honorable individual who didn't deserve it. And I don't want people to do their own research on this and be totally shocked when they find that. All right, now back to the good stuff. Records say that Teilo performed multiple other miracles, and many were witnessed, but these exact miracles weren't recorded, unfortunately. I'm not really sure why it seems to happen so often that we know miracles occurred for a saint, but we don't know what they were. He is also credited to have undertaken incredible labors on behalf of the church, but again, records are limited of what exactly they were. There are over 25 churches dedicated to him, which is the second most, only to St. David, in Wales. His exact canonization date is unknown, but it is known he was canonized. He's a patron saint of Cardiff, fruit trees, and horses, and his feast day is February 9th. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found Teilo as interesting as I did. Now, what do you think of the miracles of Teilo's body multiplying or his fight against the dragon? Do you think the dragon was some creature that we've come to know as something else? Do you think it's something that's gone extinct? Do you think... I don't know. It's something else that I didn't even propose yet. I always encourage discussion with anybody around you in the comments. It's good to talk about this stuff, get new ideas out there. Somebody might think of something that you never thought of, and when you talk about it, maybe you can almost combine ideas, and then it makes even more sense. I don't know. It's good to talk about this stuff. Of course, I welcome any support. You can subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, like. I'm on YouTube, the Sanctified Podcast, on Podbean, Amazon Music, Apple Music, same channel, the Sanctified Podcast. If you have any saints you'd like me to check out, feel free to email me at sanctifiedpodcast@proton.me. I will be excited to get into some more recommendations in the coming episodes. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.